Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Tate, and I know we haven't had a show in a little while, but training camp is here, and it's time to get to business. All right, so today we're going to be talking about draft strategy, and there's a million of them out there. But today we're going to talk about some of the more unique ones, about when you should take certain players, what kind of strategies should you take to create your team in this year's 2016 fantasy football draft. Now, I'm going to start off by talking about, there's a bunch of different ways out there. And if you go back a few years ago, the first thing everyone would tell you is this: draft a quarterback. You had to get you a Peyton Manning, a Drew Brees, a Aaron Rodgers, a Tom Brady, and that's what everyone was going with their first round pick, and that was a few years ago. But then that all changed, and then there was a point where it was just like everyone needs to have a running back. The entire first round must go to running backs. And then nowadays, it's this new concept where everyone is saying, go with the wide receiver. Draft your wide receiver and on the first round, and that's what you have to do in order to win. Well, I want to talk about some of these strategies and what they are, and give you my opinion about what you should do in your fantasy football draft. So, we're talking draft, and we're going to get down to the skinny of it. I'll be right back after a quick message, and then we're going to dive into this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we're back. And like I said before, we're talking about draft strategies. And the first one I'm going to talk about is what is called kind of like the rotator. It's kind of that rotating strategy. And what most of the people that go with the rotating strategy says is this: pick your preference. It depends on where you're at. But in the first round, you look and you say, when you come up, whether you're early or late, you say, who's that best player available? Whether it's a wide receiver or running back. And let's say if you're early in the draft and you feel like a wide receiver is the way to go, then you draft a wide receiver. But in your second round pick, you must take a running back. And then your third pick, you bounce right back to wide receiver. And then your fourth pick, you roll right into running back. And then fifth pick, wide receiver. Sixth pick, running back. And you're rotating your draft picks back and forth all the way through until you're looking at down to like the 8th round. So your first 8 picks are rotating: running back, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver. And then with your 6th pick, that's when you start thinking about you take your you not with your 6th pick. I apologize, but with your 8th pick, that's when you start looking at taking a quarterback or a top-notch tight end. And they recommend like the 8th pick to take a top-notch tight end with your 8th pick. And then with the 9th pick, you're rolling right back into you're going with your quarterback at that point. So with the rotating approach, your first 7 to 8 picks are you're rotating running back, quarterback. Running back, wide receiver, running back, wide receiver, vice versa. And you take that all the way down to your first 7 or 8 picks. Then from there, your very next pick that is not a running back or a quarterback is they tell you to take a tight end. And then from there, you roll right back into, you get your quarterback at that point. So you go 7 picks or so of running backs, wide receivers, then go tight end, then you're doing quarterback. All right. And then they're talking about, when you look at it, you're looking at either with the 11th pick, again, either another quarterback or another running back. With the 11th pick, you're taking a running back or a wide receiver, a tight end. At that point, you're picking, with your remaining picks, you're picking the best player available. So quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or tight end, but in a skill position. Now, I don't like this approach strictly because of the fact that it puts you in a situation where I don't agree with this because of the fact that it doesn't value the tight end. And your tight end is a game-changing guy. There's only a small group of tight ends out there that really change the game. Those are the guys that are the same as wide receivers. If you don't have one of the top, let's say 4 or 5 tight ends, you might as well not even bother with a tight end, because you can pick up a tight end on a daily basis because they're only going to get you a few little points here and there. So I don't like this approach because it takes the tight end and it takes it way late in the double-digit picks where you're talking 11, like 8, 9, 10, 11th round pick. And that's one of the reasons why I'm not a big fan of this one. But some people swear by this approach. It gives you the opportunity that you have a balanced receiving core and you have a balanced running game. I agree with them as far as waiting late to pick your quarterback, because you can really, really wait, because there are so many great quarterbacks out there that they all put up great points for you. So, I understand why they would wait on this one, but that's one of the approaches that they were talking about. That is a strategy for thinking about how you're going to draft your team. Now, there's another strategy out there where it's that, it's that first, you fill up your lineup first. So the strategy is you go down the line and you draft the first 2 picks, you draft 2 running backs. The next 3 picks, you draft 3 wide receivers. Next, you get your quarterback. Next, you get your tight end, and you just go down the line and you're filling up your roster. And this is that strategy that can work, because what you're doing, you're filling up your starters, and you're worrying about your bench later. Only problem that I have with this particular type of strategy, where you go through and you pick your players and you pick your first string lineup, and you worry about everything else later, is this. In the NFL, injuries kill you. And if you haven't prepared for injuries, you're dead. Last year, I had the best record in the league. I had Le'Veon Bell. He went down for injury. I had so many players that went down for injury. In the end, I finished the season with the best record in the league, but I didn't win the championship strictly because I lost a lot of my workhorses. This strategy, I don't think it really takes into account what can happen to your team. So it's one of those that you take. It's a strategy that you can think about, but I don't know if it's ultimately the best strategy for someone who is trying to win a championship. That's a good beginner strategy. But the more advanced leagues you're in, they're going to pick you apart because these guys know how to draft. So we're going to touch on the next strategy. And the next strategy that is really, really popular, and this was more popular last year and the year before, and it's becoming it's a little more passé this year. And I've always been one of these guys. And this has been my strategy for a long time. And that is, in the first round, you want to get a marquee running back, a guy that's going to get you touchdowns. And so in the first round, you draft a running back. And then you go to second round, same thing. You go with a running back. And I've always gone that approach. And then my third round has always been a running back. So I take the first 3 picks, and I want to make sure I have 3 solid running backs. And the reason why I go with three deep on the running back is this. That means I get 3 starting running backs that are actually bell cows. These are the guys that are going to get a lot of carries. I have 3 of them on my roster. If one goes down, I know I still have 2 starting, heavy workload running backs. And then from there, I would always go with the next round would be, I would go with a high-end wide receiver, trying to get the best wide receiver I can in that 4th round. And then the 5th round, I would always go with another wide receiver. Now, that's a strategy where what you're doing is you're trying to get you 3 solid running backs who's going to score a lot of points and going to get your team going strong. You're going to try to get you 2 high to middle end first number 1 wide receivers with that first 2 pick. And then I roll right into where you got your first 3 picks is running back, your next 2 picks are wide receiver. I tend to go after that quarterback. And that makes sure I get a quality quarterback, and then I go tight end. But if there's no quality tight ends available, I will pick another wide receiver, because if you're not, like I said before, if you do not have a solid tight end, if you're not putting a pick on one of those, the Gronkowskis of the world, if you're not getting one of them and you're getting a later round tight end, you might as well. I would prefer to play tight end on a game by game basis. I also say the same strategy applies to defenses. If you're not getting one of those top 3 or 4 defenses, and those top 3 or 4 defenses, I'll tell you who they are right now. That's the Denver Broncos. That's the Seattle Seahawks. That's the Arizona Cardinals. Those are only 3. Those guys are game-changing defenses. If you don't have one of those 3, then I prefer to play on a week-by-week basis, depending on who my opponent is, and trade defenses out like they're as needed. And just see what's out there. And you tend to do pretty well. But, when you're thinking about strategies, you always, in my book, always remember to keep an eye on making sure that, you get one of the top 3 tight ends. And if you don't get one of the top 3 tight ends, wait. If you don't get one of the top 3 defenses, wait and trade them out later. Now, there's another strategy out there that we're going to talk about when we come back. And this strategy, I just came across it. And it kind of surprised me. It's called the 0 running back strategy. When we come back, we're going to touch on the 0 running back strategy. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
All right, we're back. And today we're talking about preparing for your fantasy football draft and what is your strategy. And there's a number of interesting strategies out there. And we touched on two strategies. One is kind of the rotator, where you pick your first pick, you pick the first player, whether it's running back or wide receiver. And then from there, if you take a running back, you take a wide receiver next, and you go all the way down to your first 6 or 7 picks are all rotating back and forth between running back and wide receiver. And this is an interesting strategy. Then we talked about the strategy of just going through and just filling your roster up with just filling your starters up and just figuring out getting your starters together. But this strategy does not take in account and prepare you for injuries, especially in these key positions. And then I took my old approach, which could be still my present approach. I still haven't decided. But my strategy in the past has always been use the first 3 rounds to get you that workhorse running back that's going to carry the ball every single down. I took that was my approach. And then this new approach, which has just come about, and this is kind of came about where a lot of the daily fantasy league guys have been starting to, have been doing. And there's this guy, I don't know his name, but I guess he made a lot of money doing this. But it's called the zero running back strategy. And I'm not kidding. When he says zero running back strategy, you look at this, and if you look up this strategy, you go through, and it is just all wide receivers. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know how I feel about a strategy like this, but his zero running back strategy is so fascinating, because in the first round, you're drafting a wide receiver. In the second round, you're going wide out again. And, when you look at it and you say, in the third round, wide receiver. Fourth round, you're going wide receiver again. Fifth round, you're going wide receiver. So you're going through, and your first, you're talking about your first 6 or so picks is strictly wide receiver. You're not thinking about running back. You're not thinking about tight end. You're not thinking about anything dealing with, a running back. Not until like round 8 or 9. You're going through, and you're just, for your first 8 picks, you're just taking wideouts. Now that strategy, you gotta have a strong constitution, because when you're seeing all the great running backs and they're going away, and you're sitting there and you're study drafting, you're study drafting wide receivers. I don't know how I feel about that. But the one thing it does account for is this: you won't ever have to worry about injuries. You're gonna have wideouts in spades. You're gonna your position as far as wideouts go is handled. Injury, you're immune to injuries. You're, as long as you're making the right decision. Any weird changes in the lineup, you have it covered, because you've spent your entire draft, your main picks, your first 8 or 9 picks, strictly on wideouts. Then you're starting to go in the later rounds. That's when you're starting to think about like in round 12, 11, and 12. That's when you're starting to pull in your quarterback and your defense and things like that. And I thought this was kind of a crazy strategy. So I grabbed one of the draft simulators, and I started looking at it, and I started running through, and I started doing mock drafts. And I took this approach. And I was surprised at how well my lineup looked. I was still able to get a couple of running backs that I thought was, that could be something, but you know that your wide receivers are taken care of. This was a definite fascinating approach to fantasy football and the draft. It takes, like I said, it takes a strong constitution to do this. I'm not convinced I can do this one, but it's an approach that a lot of the daily league guys have been doing. This gentleman here that I read an article about, I guess he made a lot of money doing this. Then we're going to look at another strategy in which we had a situation where a gentleman, he took the approach of this: getting a tight end early. So he took the approach of, you want to go with your first or second round pick. You want to get a Gronkowski or Jordan Reed, one of those top 3 guys right out the gate. And the reason why you wanted to get a top-notch tight end within your first 2 or 3 picks was the fact that if you had a Gronkowski, it's the same as having a Julio Jones. So if you took a Gronkowski in the first round and you took a running back in the second round, that's equivalent of having a number 1 wide receiver and a stud running back. And so that's the approach that they took. And I agree with this strategy about, if you have a tight end, that can score you 15, 20 points, that's way better than having one of those tight ends that you go a little later, those interchangeable ones, because they're only going to get you 2, 3, 5 points unless you hit lightning in a bottle. So this strategy allows you to go after and get you a tight end early, and then from there start going with what's available, which is, once you get your tight end, get your running backs, then go get your wide receivers. This year I'm looking at taking a little bit of a different approach, kind of like a combination of all of these different approaches here. I look at it and I say, and I think this is one of the most common ways of looking at drafting, and that is taking the best man available. It doesn't matter what round it is. It doesn't matter what position. This is the approach I'm taking this year, and that is, I'm not going to I'm going to go into this draft completely blank. And if I'm late, if I draw a late round pick, I'm going to see where everyone taking. If everyone's taking wide receivers early, then that means most of the top wide receivers are going to be gone. I'm going to go with running back. I'm going to do the opposite of what everyone else is doing. Because if everyone goes in the first round and gobbles up wide receivers, that means that I can go running back, and then in the snake draft, I can come back and get a wide receiver in the second round. If all the top running backs are taken, then I'm going to go after, the opposite of that. The key, and the reason why I want to go the opposite is because, especially if you're looking late, is because you're taking what is given to you. If with these other strategies, you're trying to fit in what everybody is doing into a cookie cutter situation, where if you're saying, you tell yourself, I'm going running back. Well, if you're the 11th pick and your draft goes heavy on running backs early, you taking a stretch and grabbing a running back that should be a third round draft pick or fourth round draft pick, it cripples your team. So just do the opposite. If all the top running backs are gone, you go wide receiver. If all the top wide receivers are gone, you go running back. That's the approach I'm taking, because that's the approach I think will put you in the best situation so that you're getting the best player in the draft that's available at your slot. When you come in with one of these strategies, and everyone has a success story of, I let the computer draft my team and I won the league. Well, you probably weren't in a very good league. You have to play. You take what's given. That's the approach I'm taking. If all the running backs are taken, and I'm looking around and I see AJ Green or I see Dez Bryant, that's who I'm going to go with. The one thing I won't do in my strategy is I don't want to go quarterback early. There's too many quarterbacks out there that you can get. As a matter of fact, if all the top quarterbacks are taken within the first 5 rounds, so be it. Quarterbacks are a dime a dozen. I don't even have to draft a quarterback at all. I can pick one off of waivers. Matter of fact, right now the guys like Andy Dalton, they're not even projected to even be drafted this year. Andy Dalton's a guy that I would be happy to take. So, my strategy, take what you can get. Don't push it. Take quarterbacks late. Try to get you a top tight end, but don't try to fit your strategy into some cookie cutter situation where they're telling you take all wide receivers or go with running backs or do 3 of these and 2 of these. I say just be patient. Look at the board. Make sure you're making the best possible player. And it doesn't matter. If you sit down in your draft and you're doing your draft and you look around and you just took a running back in the first round and you took a running back in the second round and just so happened the next best player is a running back, take it. And if the fourth round the same way, take it. It doesn't matter how many of those guys you have, unless you're talking quarterbacks or tight ends or kickers or something like that. But when you're talking about wide receivers and running backs, just take what's given to you. Don't try to fit a strategy into your draft, because 9 out of 10 times you're going to make a stretch for a player that should not be drafted in that position, and that can throw your whole draft off. You don't care about how many running backs you're getting. You don't care about how many wide receivers. Just take the absolute best player in your draft that's available on the board. That's my take for draft strategies for this episode. We're going to have a lot more episodes. I know we had some extended time off, but now that training camp is open, we're going to start having these conversations and shows on a regular basis. There's going to be about 2 to 3 shows per week. So I look forward to talking with you guys and hearing what you guys have to say. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Tate. Remember, you can always visit us at www.GSMC GSMCpodcast.com. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and you can download us on iTunes, Stitcher, or you can find us on any app that brings in podcasts. So with that, I'm out, and I'll be talking to you a little later on this week. Have a good night.